Hey everybody.
Hey.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Ron. You may have heard us before.
Yeah, this is our 19th episode.
This will be 20 because
20.
Because we divided the last two up, each one into
right.
16 and 17 and then 18 and 19. 18 and 19 being the two hells of popping. The two hells of popping episodes.
And I have a feeling this episode may also run kind of long because we just watched a very, very dense movie.
Yes.
There's a lot going on, and this is one that Ron has seen before. I think I'd only ever heard of it because Ron talked about it.
I thought you'd heard of it before. Oh, that's cool.
Maybe I saw in like a movie guide at some point, but I had no clue. I mean, I had some idea it has something to do with Franz Liszt, which is a great way to set up that the movie we watched was Lisztomania, directed by Ken Russell, released in 1975 and starring Roger Daltrey. I don't know if I'd say it's co-starring Ringo Starr.
He makes an appearance, even though if you look online... and if you're looking to buy this or rent this or whatever, depending on the version, it lists Ringo Starr as one of the stars. I'm like, he's in it for what, 3 minutes? Two scenes, 3 minutes total.
But you do get to see Ringo Starr as the Pope. So that's a thing I never knew I needed to see until about 30 minutes ago.
Right, and now you know that how can you have gone through life without that?
Right. I always felt like there was a little something missing. I didn't realize that it was Ringo Starr in like full Pope regalia. Like he doesn't half step poping in this movie.
I mean, he sounds like Ringo Starr. There's no attempt to hide that he's Ringo Starr. Full beard and all.
This is like a really interesting movie to me for like a lot of reasons, but I think first we should talk about, because this is definitely one you've mentioned a lot of times, and I guess I'd be curious to hear now that we've both seen it, it's fresh in our minds. I guess I have my own ideas, but what attracted you so much specifically to this movie? And also like Ken Russell, who's I'd be very interested in seeing his other movies, but he's not a name that comes up a lot in like film critic circles and things like that, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I guess this would be a very hard movie to take apart in a coherent fashion because it's not really designed. Like Citizen Kane is kind of a movie that you can kind of cut it up like a cadaver in a biology classroom in about 50 minutes, perfect for classroom usage. This is not like that.
Just speaking of Citizen Kane, I was watching Velvet Goldmine last night, and it suddenly struck me like, hey, this is Citizen Kane, because you've got in this case, it's a music journalist, but he's trying to find out the story of quote unquote David Bowie.
Right.
Ryan Slade is the name of the Bowie character.
Right, and it's played by a really young Ewan McGregor, right?
No, so the Bowie character, Brian Slade, is Jonathan Rhys-Meyers.
Okay.
The young Ewan McGregor plays Kurt Weill, who is sort of the Iggy Pop character.
Okay. That's another movie I haven't seen.
Oh, we totally got to see it, and I don't want to. We'll spoil it for everyone on here on the podcast. But you expect spoilers. I don't know if you want any spoilers for your watching it. Our job isn't to spoil it for each other; it's to spoil it for the world. But we want to see an unspoiled version.
Well, that's called, sometimes it's called Dan privilege, sometimes it's called Ron privilege, and reflects in it.
To say, I don't want the spoiled?
Yeah,
there we go. Hey, what did we do? We did the Jay and Silent Bob reboot, the non-spoiler edition.
That's true.
So
maybe we should change the kind of banner on the front page. Instead of mostly movies, mostly spoilers.
Okay. I like that, because I've been struggling. I wanted to discuss with you the name, because I found that there's another podcast called Mostly Movies. So okay.
I think like mostly spoilers might capture more of the irreverent tone of this podcast, because like I think one of the things I've really enjoyed about doing this podcast is that we're looking at the movies because we find them interesting or the premise sounds interesting. There's no real expectation going in, I think, that any of these movies are necessarily going to be good or bad. And I don't think these aren't reviews per se. Like our podcast would make a terrible consumer guide, because I don't feel like somebody coming out of this would be able to say like, oh, based on what they said, I would like that movie or I would dislike that movie, which is, I think, why I've never felt bad about spoiling things, because it's a podcast, I guess, for people that want to analyze or possibly overanalyze things, sometimes for 2 hours at a time.
But have somebody else do the analysis for them. So we're both doing that here, and it's really you're doing a lot of the analysis, and I'm getting some of the overanalyzing, but with you doing the work. But no, I've actually had, so what was it, the Mac and Me episode? So again, I said I don't like to name names, but somebody, was telling me after listening to Mac and Me, they really wanted to see Mac and Me, even though, we had spoiled the whole thing, but not that made them want it to see more. But yeah, I would never listen to us until, I would after watching the movie, because I hate spoilers. And I probably mentioned that before, and I get upset when people spoil a movie for me. Or at least I'll tell them, okay, I'll probably never see this, so it's okay if you spoil it. So if I listened to something like this, well, in fact, I have listened to other podcasts about movies in which they go into detail about the whole thing. So it's either a movie that I don't want to see anyways, or it's a movie I've already seen and I want to hear.
Well, it's hard to talk for an hour without spoiling the movie, because that's like, if you transcribed one of these shows, it would be, at least 45 pages worth of text, probably. So it's hard to talk for 45 pages or an hour or 2 hours without getting into some fine detail.
Right. Somehow we managed to do it, I would say proactively, with the Jay and Silent Bob reboot. Yeah, but it was really hard to do. I guess somehow. So, I'm just looking up. I mentioned listening to other podcasts. And I'm looking up, there was actually one, no, I can't find it.
Oh, we actually have we're going to be appearing on another podcast, which is not about movies per se.
It is not about movies. It's called Your Podcast or Mine. And we can even tweet out the URL when all is said and done. But it's called Your Podcast or Mine. And it is the host, Sherry, I can't remember her last name, but Sherry interviews people who do podcasts. So when she just, ask them, people chat for a while. There's sometimes she asks them questions about the process and how they got into it and things like that.
But mostly she just gives us a status symbol so we can kind of realize we've made it to the big time. Right.
So, we're on another podcast, therefore we're famous. We're Podworld famous. So I mentioned listening to listening to another podcast, and the one there's one that I was listening to, Movie Geek and Proud, and so I listened. They did a podcast on Brazil, and I did agree with some of the stuff. Brazil used to be my favorite movie for a long time when I was definitely in high school, college. Then I didn't see it for a while. Went back and watched. I'm like, this was my favorite. I don't understand this. So, and I haven't watched it for a very long time. I watched it a few years ago, and I enjoyed it more than I did that one time.
We went to go see it at the Video Underground, right? Or were you there for that, or did I just go with Liz?
Oh, you probably went with her.
Okay.
I definitely did not go then. I missed it. But did I tell you about the alternate? Do you know about the alternate ending?
Oh yeah. I remember when I took it out from the library the first time when I was in high school. They had that big Criterion set that has like the TV cut, the Love Conquers All cut.
Yep,
I think it's usually what it's called.
Yeah.
And then I think it had 2 other cuts, or maybe one of the discs was just extra features.
No, it's possible. Let's see.
It's kind of like Blade Runner, where it just keeps getting recut over and over again. and for whatever reason.
Although the whole thing with the cutting was actually part of Terry Gilliam, the director's. Terry Gilliam's fight with was it Universal? Paramount? Oh, I can't remember. The producer or the VP or the person in charge. I remember his name was Sid Sheinberg, but I can't remember. I think it was Universal. There might have also been an acquisition in the meantime. I don't know. I'm at the I'm making stuff up point.
Right.
But what's not made up is that Terry Gilliam at some point gave up director's cut, and that's how we ended up with multiple versions. The Love Conquers All one is about half hour shorter than the other one and has a happy ending, and that was shown on TV. And that was masterminded by Sid Sheinberg. And there's a book called The Battle for Brazil, all about it, and it even has the screenplay. But it's really fascinating to read the whole story about a director and the producers, fighting each other. And the funny thing is that Sid Sheinberg actually liked the movie. He believed in it. He just didn't like how somber it was. So it says to you like, well, so he didn't like the movie. Is that what you're saying? It's like, no, there was a lot about it that he really liked.
Well, I think it's very possible for someone to really like something and completely misunderstand it. So let's talk about Lisztomania a bit. Yeah. So
do you want to go over the story? Should we?
Oh yeah, we should talk about the story. Yeah,
if you can call it that.
Okay, so Franz Liszt, classical composer, very famous even in the present day as a classical composer. He starts out as a libertine.
He's the first rock star.
Right, he's the quote unquote the first rock star. He has this. He goes around. He has a very fun, very sexy child or early adulthood, I suppose.
Yeah,
and then he moves to Russia, ends up married to, or not quite married to, the living with the not quite ex-wife of the Tsar, and then becomes a sort of monk of convenience without the chastity part. And then Richard Wagner shows up and becomes some kind of cross between Adolf Hitler and a Roy Lichtenstein painting. And
I was going to say Frankenstein, but okay.
Oh yeah, there's there's a lot. I mean, we should definitely talk about some of the costumes and sets because I feel like that's where the meat, a lot of the meat is in this movie.
Right. It's not the story. It's the I want to say vignettes. That's not what they are.
It's like a series of very symbolically charged pastiche collage images, I guess, right? Because there's like all these kind of mirror reflection things, like in the beginning when he's playing as the rock star, and he's played by Roger Daltrey of The Who at the time was an enormously successful, popular rock star. 1975, that would have been when Quadrophenia came out.
Okay.
So, playing stadiums, they've been famous for 10 years.
Yeah, because earlier in the year, Tommy came out, also by Ken Russell, and also starring Roger Daltrey, and occasionally The Who, because it wasn't The Who's rock opera. It was Tommy based. It was based on Tommy the Rock Opera, but with different singers and different actors and stuff. I mean, Tina Turner and Jack Nicholson and Elton John sings Pinball Wizard, and that's how we get the Elton John version. It's longer than The Who's version, but you do see a little bit of The Who. But the whole point was here's the movie version of Tommy and starring Roger Daltrey. That's how big a star he is at that point.
Yeah,
just one more indication.
Yeah, he's like huge, and
then he does this,
and then and this is a very strange, but I think very sincere and deeply felt film. It's just kind of coming at you in a way that I don't think audiences were quite ready for yet, because like audiences, they liked a big kind of pop art spectacle, right? Like that's the kind of inherent like lingering question of the pop movement broadly, and in the pop movement I'm including everything from like Warhol to rock and roll records to cereal boxes, just sort of the transition into a culture of visual iconography based around projected crafted personas, essentially. And the movie is constantly, Lisztomania is constantly referencing this to the point that we see Elton John and Pete Townshend, who was the kind of co-leader of The Who, painted as Andrei Rublev-style Russian icons.
It was great watching it. It was great watching them with you because I've seen it twice before, but there were all of these things that I didn't catch before. So I didn't notice that was Elton John and Pete Townshend. And I even, this time I noticed that Franz Liszt was briefly holding a rolled up comic book that he drops. You see it for all of 2 seconds, but I never really paid attention to that. It's like, oh, that's a comic book. And you called out exactly when. You pointed out what comic book it was, who was on the cover, even though it was rolled up. And when it probably came
thanks to DVD freeze frames.
Yeah.
A bit more than... I mean, I could tell immediately it was a Superman comic because that's a very distinctive S at the top. Mm-hmm. And the banner across the top was a thing that DC would only do in the 70s with their comics. So it would have been... This is like literally 2 seconds of the movie, but it's a 100-page giant. Superman's the star. I'm going to guess there's probably like a 20-page original story, and then the other like 60% of it is reprints. Mm-hmm. For some reason, Hawkman and Hawkgirl were on the cover. So from that alone, you could probably look it up on the internet and figure out exactly what comic it was.
That's true. And if we look in, let's see, 75, so it's probably filmed in 74. Or it might have been 75. Oh, actually, you know what? I think it came out towards the end because one of the listings actually marked it at the beginning 76, which isn't true. But but 75, so it was probably filmed earlier in 75.
Yeah, anyways, so the comic would have been released within probably a 2-year window of the film's production.
So we could actually look it up, and there's only going to be a few covers. I mean, it's the DC 100 special, so there's...
Yeah, DC 100, they didn't release a ton of those 100-page special. Like, there's a good number of them, but they're not... it's not like the main Superman series where we're talking about literally 1,000 different comic books.
Right. It's this one particular title. Well, now I'm really curious. After this, we can go look it up. We could always send out a link to it. Well, what I'm curious is whether he picked a particular... It was just... Sorry, let me backtrack. What I'm curious is whether Ken Russell picked a particular issue based on the story that's in there, or if that's what was on the stands at that particular point.
I think it's specifically Superman. That can't be a mistake because later on in the film, when we see Richard Wagner's kind of fascist cult emerging, Nazi cult, or pop Nazis, I guess, because a lot of the iconography this is a very weird movie in the sense that it has maybe the loosest sense of time and chronology I've ever seen in a movie. Mm-hmm. At one point, we see Franz Liszt, who's actually Roger Daltrey, who is supposedly living in the middle of the 19th century because he's younger then, so we're figuring like 1850 maybe.
Okay. I guess we could look that up.
Yeah, we could probably look that up. And so
we leave it as an exercise to the listener
to send us letters with like bitching and moaning about what we got wrong, because that's engagement. That's how they get you.
Right, none of this email stuff or tweeting at us. I mean, we mean letters. We mean paper. Envelope. We want you to, when you're closing the envelope, you have to lick the little spot underneath so it sticks. Postage stamp. It could be what do you call them? The everlasting postage stamps or ever priced or whatever it's called. So you could have bought it 2 years ago. Don't need a new postage stamp, but we want postal mail. Anyways, I'm sorry.
So we see Liszt, who ostensibly is living in 1850, or maybe this is 1860 because he's remembering being young, but he's still clearly an adult. And his memory of the past is modeled entirely off of, I would say mostly the Gold Rush, but also City Lights, arguably the two most famous Chaplin films. Gold Rush, for those who don't remember it by name, if you ever saw Benny and June, that's where they stole the dancing rolls bit. Mm-hmm. And if you ever heard about Werner Herzog eating his shoe, the reason why he offered to eat his shoe was because Charlie Chaplin eats his shoe in the Gold Rush.
And you can actually find online Werner Herzog eating a shoe.
Right, and that was because he lost a bet to Errol Morris, because he said to Errol Morris, if you can finish your first feature film, which ended up being Gates of Heaven, that documentary about pet cemeteries, which I love that movie.
Not to be confused with Heaven's Gate.
Right, it was a very different movie from... Actually, they're not that far apart release date-wise.
Oh, okay.
I think one was 83, one was 80 or 85. No, I think the Errol Morris one was 85.
Story-wise, they're a little different.
They're very different.
And only one of them bankrupted United Artists.
And anyway, so Errol Morris, he finishes the movie, and Werner Herzog ate his shoe. Yeah. And Les Blank was there to document it.
Werner Herzog, star of The Mandalorian.
Right.
Featuring Baby Yoda.
Right. Also known as Agir Wrath of Khan. Or wait, no, it's Star Trek. Never mind. We're going to get some hate mail over that one.
Oh, wow. You just confused Star Trek and Star Wars. I mean, I like both, but the confusion. Oof.
But yeah, so we have a man who is supposed to be in 1860, remembering the past as 1926's version of the 1890s when the gold rush took place. Like, if you need like a quick definition of what postmodernism is, there you go.
All right. Because there is a whole Chaplin-esque sequence. I mean, it's like a Charlie Chaplin movie that complete with what seems like the sped up reel.
Yeah, the sped up reel. They're moving kind of funny. Daltrey does a passable Chaplin.
Despite his golden locks.
Right. It's the only time we ever see snow or mountains in the movie. When they open the door, we look through the window in that sequence. Uh-huh. Not to say that there aren't snow and mountain. There isn't snow and there aren't mountains in Germany, but it's like very obviously supposed to be him in the cabin in the gold rush, dreaming about the little the girl or whatever. And then when he walks off with the girl out the door into the distance, that's a pretty direct lift from, or not. He doesn't really. The thing is, with this kind of pop art, there's not really lifting, because the entire language is made out of other language. It's like a Frankenstein, right? But it's very, very directly referencing the last scene of City Lights, where the tramp walks off with the blind girl whose operation to have her sight restored. He just paid for.
Okay.
Which I guess that's not really a spoiler. Like, if you're going to Charlie Chaplin movies because you want to be in suspense about the ending, then you're watching it wrong. That's not what they're about.
and you've probably seen this scene, although you might not know the whole story or how it ends up there. You recognize the last scene. It's pretty iconic. A lot of Chaplin's stuff is iconic. You know.
Oh yeah, I mean, he was the biggest movie star. Like, technically, Harold Lloyd made more money in the 1920s than Chaplin did, but he also released about like 3 or 4 times as many movies, because Chaplin insisted on scoring all of his own movies, which made them take a very long time to make, because I mean, honestly, for a guy who didn't have, I don't know if he had any formal music training, like, they're not bad scores. I personally would have liked it if he'd spent more time doing physical comedy when he was still in his physical prime and could do it, but it is what it is.
He wrote Smile, right? He did the music and the lyrics,
Smile,
and that's been covered by so many
from City Lights.
Oh, it is from City Lights. Okay. So,
or no, is it from, pretty sure that's from City Lights. Maybe it's from Modern Times. I don't know. I gotta watch.
Oh, so Lisztomania. I know you're saying Liszt. I'm going to keep saying Liszt. And say it. Back to that.
I don't have a good German accent. I'm just trying to pronounce a Z that I don't know how to pronounce.
No, that's fine. I'm not questioning the pronunciation. I don't know what's right. It might be Leitz's, for all I know. You put the Z after the end. But
3/4 of it's actually silent, so it's just le.
Franz Le. Franz Le.
Yeah.
So what was the question you asked me about? You asked me before we did the recap.
Oh, so
because you said I've seen about this? My seeing.
Well, you've mentioned the film a lot of times. It's clearly like something that made a big impression on you. Like I can get some sense why, having seen it. I remember when I was first getting to know you and I was like selling off a lot of my DVDs. The first one that you immediately made a beeline to was Gothic, which I presumed was like a B-grade horror movie. And you're like, no, this is a Ken Russell movie.
Yeah.
And I was like, who's Ken Russell? And that's like, it takes a lot to stump me on movie stuff.
Do you remember what the other movie was? Because I actually got 2 movies.
I think it was Tommy, right? Yeah.
Also
both Ken Russell movies.
This, I don't know, was there coherence here? I guess, there was some running theme.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like when a movie doesn't have traditional coherence, the easiest way, or the most, maybe not the easiest way, the most fruitful way that I found to analyze those kinds of movies is to sort of look at them as a series of thematically interrelated images and track what is the difference between this representation of this concept at this point and, you know, later transformations, transmutations of that concept. And through that lens, this is actually, I think, a very coherent movie. So much of it is about celebrity, outsiders looking, or sort of how a person's self is constructed through their relationship to images. I think that becomes most explicit in both the scene at the beginning when he finds his daughter has this doll of him and he jokes about it being a voodoo doll. Later, it comes back as an actual voodoo doll. And to drive the point home, as Roger Daltrey lists, is being tortured by his daughter with this voodoo doll. He's standing in front of a bunch of broken mirrors.
Right.
We only see this broken image. When we see him in front of the crowd, like every scene of performance with the crowd is simultaneously a commentary on mirroring, I guess, for lack of a better term. Like you have the crowd is this amorphous mass, so the person performing or standing in front of the crowd is still kind of relating to it.
He's giving them what they want.
Yeah. He exists as their image, and also the fact that Roger Daltrey is this pop star who does this for a living when he's not starring in crazy Ken Russell movies.
Because he's also in Tommy.
Right, and and I think also just this issue of pop iconography, pop stardom, the line between idolatry and this sort of fascination with imagined images of people is what ties together why you can have such like a movie with such serious themes that decides it's a huge advantage to cast Ringo Starr and Roger Daltrey, who, I mean, you know, they do a good job in the movie, but if you're just going for like, you know, traditional acting, there's a lot of other people you would pick to do those things beforehand. But the fact that they already have this kind of icon capital behind them is integral to the overall structure of the film. It's kind of like how John Ford uses John Wayne in Man Who Shot Liberty Valance as the symbol of the kind of mythical imagined West versus Jimmy Stewart being the actual
things were really like
the thing that happened.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, if you were looking, I mean, to fill this role, if not for that purpose, you can get somebody who's actually a good actor. I mean, he wasn't horrible, but he's not a good actor. Yeah.
He's a great performer, and he's not a good actor, right? It's this.
And the music wasn't that challenging, so you don't need a great singer. You need a good actor with an okay singing voice. And instead, we got somebody who can act his way through the movie and who has a good singing voice. I don't know.
I mean, Ringo Starr is not a good actor. Ringo Starr is incredibly good at one thing, and that's being Ringo Starr. Right. And that's fine, you know, like he has this Zen-like peace about him insofar as he's sort of, you never get the sense that he has this little man complex. You never look at Ringo Starr and think that man wishes he was John Lennon.
Yeah.
Or Paul McCartney or even George Harrison. He's just like, well, boy, I got lucky. Let's make a caveman movie, you know?
Which we've got to watch.
Right, we do have to watch it.
I just found out. I didn't realize it. So I know I've seen there's a Ringo Starr caveman movie, and I know that I've seen it. And Dan just informed me right before this that that was a character he played on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson.
Yeah, he would show up for the interviews, and then he'd do, I think it was like a voice he did to entertain his kids, and he told Carson once, and then it just sort of snowballed because people just loved hearing Ringo Starr do this ridiculous caveman voice, I guess, or maybe, and at the very least, Johnny Carson seemed very amused.
Yeah. And if Johnny Carson's amused, America's amused.
Right.
That's sort of the way the Tonight Show worked. But yeah, and Ringo Starr, he's affable, he's amiable. You want to go hang out with him at a party, you know, you're gonna have a fun time, you know, chatting with him. No airs about him, kind of a. So here we've got him as the Pope.
Right, like if you hang out with like John Lennon, you know he's gonna drink too much. You know there's gonna be like an hour or two of really uncomfortable shit about like his conflicted relationship with his parents. You know he's smart and he's funny and everything, but Ringo Starr seems like he's the calm at the middle of the storm that was the Beatles, right? Because he's the only one that all of them would work with afterwards.
Oh, really?
I think so, right? Because you never see George Harrison on like a John Lennon record or a Paul McCartney record. You never see Paul McCartney on a John Lennon or a George Harrison record, but you see Ringo Starr on all of them.
Oh, no kidding.
And his own.
Wow.
And he would get, the Ringo Starr records were the only ones where you'd get like token contributions maybe from the entire band at different points in the record.
So not together. They're all different studios, probably.
Yeah, no, actually, God, there's a great story about, I think it was 1974, because Paul McCartney and John Lennon would still hang out after the Beatles broke up, and they were watching, no, it wasn't, it had to be later than 74, I think, because they were watching, I think, Saturday Night Live, and somebody made a joke on Saturday Night Live about the Beatles getting back together, and John Lennon was in New York City at that point. McCartney was in Lennon's apartment. They were right down the street from the NBC studio where Saturday Night Live was being filmed live, and they considered just walking over to the studio and doing it to just sort of shock everybody. And then they didn't, but...
why didn't they do it? I've heard this before. Do you remember why they didn't do it? Or was it just, meant getting up?
Lennon might have been too drunk. I don't know. I mean, he had a pretty epic Lost Weekend with Harry Nilsson that went on for multiple years. If Mark David Chapman hadn't gotten to him, his liver would have, like John Lennon's liver was carrying around a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. Let's just put it that way.
So Lisztomania. Yeah, so I love it's I mean, part of it is the images. A big part of it is the images and just how it's not quite cartoony, but it's surreal. It's just how surreal the images are, and there's some very surreal scenes. Obviously, like the dream sequence. Well, would turn out to be sort of dream or fantasy sequences. But also, I like musicals. And it is a musical, and I really like outside of musicals and movies and all that, I like listening to pop music that is done that's performed by classical as a classical piece, and I like classical pieces that are done as rock, heavy metal, anything something else. So not like Muzak or something like that.
So something where like the genre transformations or
okay, I like that. I've never heard that phrase. So that's I like genre transformations. So there's definitely that here. I mean, it's all pieces. It's mostly pieces by Liszt, a few by Wagner. But they're, some of them are played, I want to say in a classical style, and some of them are played as are very poppy. And there's even words. There's songs attached to them. So you've got Liebestrom number 3, which is this beautiful, like somewhat melancholy love poem. And he wrote symphonic poems. That's what a lot of his. So it's a symphonic poem. And so now here we've got Rick Wakeman. Actually, that's not true. I don't think.
He was in the credits.
He was in the credits. Okay, remind me in a second.
He was doing something. Yeah,
he was doing something. So he's got 2 credits. But so there's words written to these. So suddenly it's become oh love, sweet love, as long as love shall last, long as love shall last, something like that. But so great. Hey, it works. So I love having that addition too. That's part of it. It's the music too. Rick Wakeman. Okay, so all these years I thought that Rick Wakeman did the music and the lyrics. It turns out he did the music. The lyrics were attributed to Roger Daltrey, Ken Russell, and a third person. Rick Wakeman wasn't listed in the lyrics. Which Rick Wakeman, he was in Yes, but he also
in Traffic, I believe.
Oh, was he?
Beforehand. And he's also, this is a really, and I have the CD over here somewhere, but the first Lou Reed solo album after the Velvet Underground breaks up, the band backing him on most of it, I must have heard the record like 15, 20 times, never picked up on this at all. It's basically Yes.
Oh.
It's Lou Reed fronting prog rock keyboard mavens.
Oh, well, that's
yes,
neat.
And they just sound like kind of a slightly more generic version of the Velvet Underground. I love, that's a great record. That's the one that has Love Makes You Feel 10 Feet Tall. It's a great song.
But so with Rick Wakeman?
Yeah, good.
But so Rick Wakeman is also known. Meatloaf, like a whole bunch of his songs are Rick Wakeman songs, and Total Eclipse of the Heart is Rick Wakeman. But so he does the music and the lyrics. He also did Tanz der Vampire, or Dance of the Vampires, which is based on, it's a German vampire musical based on the Roman Polanski film The Fearless Vampire Killers. There was also briefly an American version on Broadway of the show starring Michael Crawford of Phantom and the Hello Dolly movie fame. Anyways, so this is all the kind of stuff that Rick Wakeman does. Oh, and now there's a new or recent musical called Bat Out of Hell, which is sort of the Meatloaf musicals, but it's mostly Meatloaf songs, I guess. But there's also is Total Eclipse of the Heart in it? No, I don't think it is. But I think my sister recognized a Yes song. It's like, what is this doing here? And it's like, oh, Rick Wakeman is
it's like a Total Eclipse of the Heart. That's when you need stents, right?
That's when you need what?
That's when you need stents.
Ah, I see what you did there. Aha.
But yeah, there's Rick Wakeman.
But yeah, it looks like Rick Wakeman didn't actually do lyrics here. Rick Wakeman piano. Wow, look at that. Yeah, he does some wacky stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this was 1972, so I don't know if he would have been. Wait, no, he wasn't in Traffic. I'm thinking of Steve Winwood, totally different person. But he was on the Lou Reed record.
Now I want to go back after this, and we'll do this. We haven't done an errata for a while. By the way, I have a few episodes worth. If we want to do this, maybe at the end.
We could do like a mega errata for like the people that listen just for the errata.
I see.
Maybe
an entire episode that's just errata. But so Lisztomania. So we're talking about images. I'm trying to think, or are there any that stood out especially for you?
Well, I think when we first see the kind of Wagnerite Nazi cult, it's a bunch of small children who can't be more than maybe 10, 12 years old, the oldest.
Yeah.
And one of the guys who was it Wagner himself, or was it Liszt's daughter's husband that's speaking to them initially? I think it was
Wagner. It's Wagner. Wagner's reading to them with his blonde wig.
Right. And actually, I have a point about hair, but I'll stay on topic for now. They're all wearing these great matching costumes it's got a Wonder Woman logo on the chest.
The W, which is really W for Wagner, but
the overall design looks like a Superman, or I guess a cross between Superman and the Mick Anglo 60s British knockoff of Captain Marvel called Marvel Man, which was later remade by Alan Moore into Miracle Man, but to bring it full circle to the Alan Moore discussion. But
we actually talked about that before, because that ends up leading to the current Captain Marvel, not to be confused with the old Captain Marvel, who's now known as Shazam. Yeah, we talked about that. I think it was in this. I can't remember what movie we saw anymore. It might have been of Planet of the Apes, where we also separated into 2 episodes. We had the one that covers Planet of the Apes, and then the not spoilers, like the addendum. It was all the stuff on the cutting room floor.
The director's cut.
The director's cut, which is all stuff that we could, we should be doing this probably to most of our episodes, but that one
we both have other jobs too. We haven't you haven't elevated us to a Roger Daltrey like level of fame where we can just live on the podcast yet.
Right. Right. We're getting there. We're on the way. So thank you, everyone.
But so Wagner has the cult, and they're all wearing, and also the capes aren't quite exactly the Superman cape, even though they're the red color. The red color is then transformed into sort of a double reference because it's got this kind of like Dracula-like collar, and we also repeatedly see these Wagnerites and the people leading up to them in the narrative, particularly a guy who runs around wearing a Nietzsche hat from the beginning of the film.
That's Wagner.
Oh, that is Wagner. When he's a little kid, or when he's younger, I guess.
When he's younger,
okay.
So from the beginning we see...
Wow, okay, I was confused about this movie.
Oh, you didn't realize that was Wagner the whole time?
I think they said his name really quickly, but then they said the names of like 15 other classical composers.
Yeah, he's introducing them to all of them, to Brahms, Mendelssohn, and all that, and Wagner is kind of starstruck and also...
So that's kind of hilarious that Wagner is wearing a Nietzsche cap, since Nietzsche was like a fanboy of Wagner, not vice versa.
Oh.
And then Nietzsche also did eventually reject Wagner because of the anti-Semitism issue. Because Nietzsche, I have a lot of very complicated feelings about Nietzsche, but that's another episode. Anyway, back to superheroes, pop iconography, and all this stuff. So he's giving this talk to the kids.
Oh, wait, just one thing, because you were talking about and realizing about Wagner, and you mentioned vampire or Dracula, and Wagner does turn out to be a vampire. He has the vampire teeth. He sucks on the on Liszt's neck to get some of his music. But sorry.
Actually, that's a really good. You have seen this more times than me, so you can actually like piece it together to go. Because like if I didn't realize that guy at the beginning was Wagner, like I was like way off in image land to a point where it might be hard for some listeners to piece together what I'm talking about if they have the film in front of them.
And you say, wait, are you talking about Wagner? Wait, that guy? You mean that guy right there? So yeah. So
Wagner, he creates this cult of children who go out, killing things and creating havoc. There's further references to Frankenstein, to the Jack Kirby design of Thor, the cliches of mad science movies all around Wagner. Wagner's kind of German nationalism, which... To put it in historical context, Germany wasn't really functionally a single country until like the very late into the 19th century. It was sort of like pre-unification China. It was a lot of like little things that were kind of lumped together on a map.
Prussia was big.
Yeah.
But Prussia wasn't Germany.
And so he rises this combination of Frankenstein and pop appropriation of Norse mythology into fascism, essentially.
Yeah. Complete with swastikas. That's what I was saying.
Complete with swastikas, which is kind of collapsing. And then Liszt, a.k.a. Roger Daltrey, takes them out with a spaceship made out of an organ from heaven or something. Anyway.
Yeah, because Liszt and all his mistresses and wife and daughter are all in heaven with him, and they're all playing stringed instruments. He's playing the harp or a lyre, and they're all playing the violins and cello and stuff. And
that reminds me of another movie too, the Ernst Lubitsch. You ever seen Heaven Can Wait?
Yeah. Wait.
The 1941 one.
Yeah,
right. And the guy's kind of, he cheats on his wives, he cheats on his his mistresses, but everybody has a relatively good time. And Lubish's moral, which not coincidentally is being pushed by him as a German, as a guy who was pushed out of Germany for being Jewish, that there's worse things in the world than this, and we need to reconsider our priorities in terms of what morality is. That's kind of, and he does it with the scene in heaven at the end, basically, kind of like what, I mean, I guess that's not the exact message that Russell is trying to get across with the list in heaven with his mistresses and children thing at the end. One thing I found really, really fascinating was because Liszt's daughter kind of betrays him to go over to the side of Wagner, and her justification for doing so is basically, you left me alone, which is kind of true. Earlier in the film, we see that Liszt is not really a very present parent, to say the least.
No, he's not winning Father of the Year.
Yeah, he's kind of surrounding himself with architecture that looks like penises all the time. And not that, like, you could be a good parent and still do that, probably. I don't want to, like, if you're living in a house made out of penises, I'm not going to throw the first stone. Or however that goes, but yeah, I thought that was very interesting because it's the closest thing we get to some kind of rationale for the followers of Wagner, because like Wagner early on, it's established that his motivations within the narrative are jealousy of Liszt and these other composers, and this kind of false nostalgia for a unified Germany that never really existed, pulled out of, I guess, like Visigoth culture or whatever.
And he believes in his own greatness.
Yeah, and especially with the Nazi thing, the fact that she's saying, like, oh, the parents abandoned us, within the context of how Germany ended up in World War II and how Germany was left after World War I, there's a lot to unpack in that statement, because like a lot of the children who would have felt angry and abandoned in Germany, who probably did end up becoming Nazis in large part, if they were abandoned by their parents, it was probably because their parents were killed in the First World War, because there was an enormous, like, Germany took a huge death toll in the First World War. And the First World War, unlike the Second World War, was mostly fought. It was a couple million people died essentially because a couple rich people decided they weren't rich enough and wanted to come to blows about it.
Right.
When Lenin made his case to the what became the Soviet socialist republics, the reason why he was taken seriously by 1917 is that he was the only one who, in the years leading up to the war, had essentially called it a war of the rich that has nothing to do with us. You're being used as cannon fodder. The people that were more close to the center, I'm forgetting, there's like a guy he feuds with a lot in his major writing, especially the shorter pamphlets. Oh God, what is that guy's name? It'll come to me. But yeah, when he comes back from exile in Germany, and he makes this case to the Russian people that, hey, this war was literally pointless. That's why they were willing to let the Bolsheviks be the ones to reunify Soviet Russia after the feudalist system of the czars had collapsed under its own weight and rot. And in Germany, yeah, you had massive inflation, like hyperinflation, the likes of which we've literally never seen in the United States. We're talking about, and mostly because the other countries of the world decided, and instead of trying to help rebuild Germany the first time around, they were going to cripple Germany outright with war debt. They were basically like, you lost the war. We all know it was pointless. We're going to make you pay for the whole war.
Yeah.
Eventually,
with money you don't have.
Right, with money you don't have. Eventually, the currency becomes entirely worthless. You have to like bring a wheelbarrow worth of Deutschmarks to buy like bread or something. But also, you have an entire lost generation, and you had two of those almost in succession in Germany because of how closely the two world wars were to each other chronologically. So that struck me as kind of interesting, this sort of weird little footnote of Nazism essentially being children lashing out over feelings of powerlessness, over being abandoned by the fallout, or by what would have been the fallout from the First World War. Probably not. Most abandoned German children, with it, if we're taking the World War II context as opposed to the like German unification warring context that the movie kind of conflates it with, it wouldn't have been because they were out like banging groupies like Franz Liszt was.
There was a sorry.
Oh, no,
I was gonna say there was an interestingly sympathetic view towards Germans in this movie, and this is Ken Russell, who's he's British, maybe English, I'm not sure, and so he probably, actually I don't know how old he is, but we could look this up, but he was affected by World War II, whether it's his childhood or the entire nation is still feeling it, because there was a lot of people lost
for warfare in England. And to go back to the Alan Moore discussion again for hopefully the last time, but the big difference when superhero revisionism came in a big way, or not revisionism, maybe deconstructionism, I guess, in a big way in the 80s, the two major proponents, Alan Moore, Frank Miller. Frank Miller grew up in the United States, and he decides that, the way that we do this is we amp everything in the comic up to 10. Batman's going to be super violent. He's going to kill the Joker. He's going to do this, that, and the other thing. And Moore took it as just sort of, oh God, these are fascist. The superheroes are their own fascist iconography, kind of like what Ken Russell is saying in this movie. We need to... Alan Moore basically hates superheroes. He makes no bones about it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that one of them... And also, I think with the U.S. readers' misinterpretations of a lot of Moore's work come down to one culture saw intensive domestic warfare, air raids, air sirens, houses getting obliterated. And the U.S., we didn't, outside of Pearl Harbor, we didn't really see that.
Right.
And certainly somebody of Moore or Russell's age, I'm imagining they both probably were born slightly after the war.
We can look this up.
Or Russell maybe like during the war or slightly before the war.
See, Ken Russell was born in 1927. So
so he was conscious and aware through the war. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Let's see. So he would have turned 18 in 1945. So, he didn't know the war was about to end. As far as he was concerned, he was getting ready to be conscripted. But, actually D-Day. Yeah. All right. Yeah. At this point, the Allies are making inroads into, by the time he's 18.
Because the war in Europe was over by 44. The war in Japan didn't end until 45 when the bombs were dropped and the Emperor signed the...
No, war in Europe ended in, VE Day. That was in 45.
Oh, that wasn't 45?
Yeah, it's April or May. I can't remember. And then Japan is June. I can't remember.
Oh, weird. I thought it was late 44. I need to brush up on my World War II stuff.
D-Day is 44. D-Day is June 44.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, the war in Europe doesn't end until 45. Hitler kills himself in April of 45, and then the Germany surrendered shortly after that. So there were
and Russell also makes a lot of light of the common mistranslation of Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch. which literally translated as the Overman, but usually it's translated as the Superman.
Yeah, so he's totally playing with that idea.
And that's why, the Superman iconography, the Superman comic. I mean, also the fact that when we see List is holding this Superman comic, he goes to make out with some woman. I forget which woman it was at that point.
I think it was the princess. So that was the Tsar's wife? Yeah,
and he takes this thing that he has pretty tightly. He's got it rolled up, which is not a common way to hold. At least now, it isn't a common way to hold a comic book.
Yeah.
And he drops it on the ground as if he's sort of he's neglecting some kind of responsibility in retrospect, as we look at it later in the film with the Superman Nazi thing coming into play.
Well, the movie holds his music accountable somewhat, but it's not so much him. It's Wagner appropriating his music.
Right, and I guess with like the current fascist uprising, if I was going to make parallels, or at least try to figure out like how would Ken Russell read this situation, like Liszt would be the sort of center apolitical class that has sort of increasingly been fading away as our situation's gotten more dire politically. But like people were very strident and insistent about like, I'm apolitical, I just want to go to work, earn some money, and have some fun.
Yeah.
Up until Trump got elected, basically. The Wagners are the people in the background that wanted authoritarianism that we didn't take seriously because they seemed ridiculous. The Christian right, etc. And then Wagner himself is this sort of narcissist who thinks he believes in something, which would be Donald Trump.
A narcissist who thinks he believes in something. Okay, one more thing I've got to wrap my head around.
Right, because he keeps talking about German reunification. It's a false nostalgia. It's him projecting his own, the things that he's not happy with about himself, because like narcissism and grandiosity as it's experienced by a person with narcissistic personality disorder usually involves like a conflicted, scattered persona. They don't have a strong feeling of self, and as such, they need to be like constantly vigilant and constantly projecting these ridiculous things outward. Because they just literally can't stand being with themselves. That's why like Trump never stops talking. So they, and that's also why he constantly blames other people for things he just did, because it's a way that he externalizes the part of himself that he doesn't like so that he can maintain ego function. And so Wagner thinking about this unified Germany on some level is just him projecting outward his desire for like pride and unified self, which ultimately, as it does when these kinds of people are given power and adoration, which is kind of like putting water onto a gas fire, they just become increasingly grandiose because the underlying problem can't actually be resolved with mass adoration and indulgence slash what's that word in like enabling.
Okay. So in here, Liszt starts off as that apolitical class, or as part of that apolitical class. I mean, he wants to just, like I said, he's a libertine. He just wants to go sleep around, have fun, and by the end of it, it's his mission to kill Wagner. He becomes a priest or an abbé or whatever, and he tries to kill Wagner with holy water.
Right, his becoming an abbé. There's another symbolic throwing of something. Right, he throws that bottle into the lake, and then we never see him, or into the stream, and we never see him drink again. Really.
Oh, right. Oh, I never thought about that. Yeah, that's a really good point. We see him have sex.
We do see him have sex.
Although it was at gunpoint. So that was well, no, we know this is all spoilers, and say that spoiled the joke.
Right, and sex at gunpoint is probably, I mean, at least like a Freudian reading of that would be the person is having the sex for the benefit of establishing their kind of self-conception of how they perceive other men looking at them. because like a gun is a penis in a Ken Russell film. A cigar is a penis in a Ken Russell film.
A penis is a penis in a Ken Russell film.
Right. Penis is very useful for a lot of things around the house in a Ken Russell film. You know, sometimes it holds up. Apparently, the pillars of heaven are just marble penises.
Yep. Complete with vein.
Right, like a gun to the because a gun is always, or I guess, yeah, like the gun to the head is society's abstract penis pressuring him to do something which he doesn't really seem to be enjoying at that point. Like earlier on, he's kind of doing it he's having all this sex for himself.
No, he finally leaves the room even though he's being shot at.
Right.
And he was like, no, I'm leaving. I don't want this sex.
Right.
So penises. Ken Russell has never met a phallic object that he didn't like and want to put on screen. Even
there's a lot of boobs too, but the penises are the only things that take on like this. Well, no, there's butts at one point, but we never see like any kind of memorialized or like borderline deified female genitalia, except for when List is being literally having his penis cut off by this woman's vagina, which is shown as a guillotine.
Yeah, so the image that always stands out for me, and it's another friend who introduced me to this movie. Again, I didn't know who Ken Russell was. He might have made the reference to Gothic, and this is a very different movie, despite ultimately being just such a mindfuck and an eye fuck. So he described it as Roger Daltrey riding a 12-foot penis across the room. Now,
I mean, it's a pretty literal description of
except that he's not riding it. It is his 12-foot long.
It's guiding him.
3 foot tall. Right.
We know who's in charge, and it's not Roger Daltrey at that moment. It's
his. You
can't really. I was going to say it's Little Roger, but you can't really call him Little Roger at that point when he's 12 foot.
No, that's Massive Roger. There's regular Roger, and then there's a mass of Roger. But it's being pulled as if with a tractor beam to the guillotine. So that's that image stands out for me. That's the way I describe it to people when I say, hey, have you heard of this movie? No. Do you want to see a movie in which Roger Daltrey rides a 12-foot penis across the room? And, that right there, what more could you want in a movie?
Before that, she's standing in front of these giant gilded penises. She's smoking cigars, which we all know that maybe for Freud, sometimes a cigar was just a cigar. For Ken Russell, a cigar is not just a cigar.
Right. No, not even, it's again, so...
like, halfway into this movie, I kind of, like, you ever heard any of those things, like, if you look really closely at this cell in The Little Mermaid, you can see the castle's actually a penis?
Yeah.
Or, like...
Yes.
SpongeBob's nose is actually a penis, and I got the sense that, like, Ken Russell was the guy going in, sneaking penises into all these things.
How do I stick a penis into the Little Mermaid movie? How do I stick a penis into the SpongeBob TV show? Can I do it multiple times?
Conspiracy.
Yeah. Well, no. You know what? No. That doesn't work. Because
he
these
probably
things
was
it's
dead
subtle
later, but
no. But I said that in the Little Mermaid and SpongeBob SquarePants, if it's real, it's subtle and hidden. Ken Russell, there's nothing subtle about Ken Russell, and he would not hide anything. He puts them front and center. If you watch the Lair of the White Worm, which is an early, not Hugh Jackman, the British actor that got caught with a hooker. He's not that big.
Jimmy Savile? No, I'm kidding.
No, who?
Oh, you ever been following the Jimmy Savile scandal?
No.
So he was like, he was like the biggest children's TV show star in England for maybe 35 years. And then it came out that the BBC was essentially shielding him from literally hundreds of like child rape accusations.
Are you serious? Wow.
Yeah, like it puts Harvey Weinstein to shame, even. Like, huge, but, he was a nobody in the United States. So, like, nobody in the United States is going to know who the fuck The only thing anybody in the U.S. knows about Jimmy Savile is because he made international news for being at the absolute heart of this scandal with the BBC and them shielding pedophiles, basically.
If they've heard of him, because they likely haven't even.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not. We got enough of our own problems.
Yeah. But no. Who I was thinking of, I looked it up. Who I was thinking of was Hugh Grant. So,
Hugh Grant. Yeah.
So Lair the White Worm has Hugh Grant in it.
Wait, the romantic comedy guy?
Yeah. He's in Lair the White Worm.
We might have to. God, we get so many movies on the list at this point.
Oh yeah. Or they could do nothing but Ken Russell for the next few months. What was Lair the White Worm. I mean, it is, you just count in the first half hour, there's 20 phallic symbols, which are just...
Well, I was kind of wondering with Lisztomania, like, how was it, where was this screened, what was it rated, how was it distributed? Because I know, like, there's...
Who was the target audience?
A lot of, like, the Warhol movies that got, I mean, not wide distribution, but wide distribution by the standards of a Warhol movie. So I'm talking about, like, Paul Morrissey's Flesh, Heat, Trash, Flesh for Frankenstein, Blood for Dracula, Chelsea Girls, what's the other one? I mean, there's a lot of them. And, you know, they get these very limited runs in maybe Los Angeles and New York, and they'd be shown on midnights. A couple could say, and that's the only other place where I can think where just, like, out and out dick was shown that was before this movie. I can't think of a lot of movies where there's just, like, dick for the sake of dick and, like, blatant, obvious homoeroticism expressed through male nudity. Although, I mean, I guess, like, Ken Russell, I wouldn't necessarily call it, I think it's like everything eroticism, but he does seem to have a special place in his heart for the penis. That sounds like a medical problem.
Although there's an extra chamber in the heart. He has a fifth chamber that is just for the penis.
Right. There's the aorta, and then there's that little place. Yeah, it looks like.
And it expands as necessary.
Right.
No. So interestingly enough, there isn't a single actual live male penis. You don't see. There's no male full frontal nudity. You get female. You get lots of breasts.
But when he has like the 12-foot dick, like there's no mistaking that is a dick. It's veiny. It's that's the most straight. And I mean, I think it's more obvious because, like, in the Warhol movies, it's Joe D'Alessandro walking around who Warhol clearly had a crush on. I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of Joe D'Alessandro, but he's like, I mean, I'm like a straight dude, and I'm just like, damn, that is a good-looking man, you know, right? Like, but most of the time, if his dick's out, he's just like walking around the house or something. He's not like, you know, riding it into oblivion like the bomb from Doctor Strangelove, you know.
I'm looking up, is it Alessandro Joe?
No,
that's somebody else.
Joe, Joe.
I first heard Jode.
Joe, yeah.
Joe D'Alessandro. Okay. Oh yeah, okay. So that was
Warhol and Paul Morrissey, who was the guy who actually directed a lot of the Warhol movies.
Oh, okay.
Like, Warhol himself directed most of the ones where it's just a stationary shot of something. The ones that have more plot and they're more in depth were usually directed by Paul Morrissey.
Okay. So Ken Russell and penises. I don't know, what more is there to say about it? I mean, there's lots of them.
He just, he forcefully thrust cinema into the future that way, I guess.
Yeah.
But, even up to today, male frontal nudity, I can count on one hand the number of TV programs and movies where I've seen, semi-realistic or depiction of a penis or male frontal nudity.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, one of them is the Louis C.K. HBO sitcom that he did before Louis. It was a big deal. The second episode, he just shows up with his dick out for a minute, which ended up being pop culture foreshadowing, meta foreshadowing, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's pretty unfortunate, and that we didn't all see what was actually going on. Although I mean, people knew. Well, obviously,
at the time it was taken, because I mean, I was following his career pretty closely, because he was the hot thing going in vaguely experimental television for a while. And at the time it was taken as like, whoa, it's on HBO, but it's not just like another reason to show people tits. Like, this guy's going out there and he's bearing it all. Of course, later on we find out that he's an exhibitionist.
Right. And suddenly it all makes sense.
Like a non-consensual exhibitionist, I suppose.
Right. It's like Woody Allen ends up with Soon-Yi, and then now we look back at all his movies and it's like, it's so obvious.
Well, Manhattan, yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know if the first 5 or 6 comedies, there's not enough. Well, okay, there's like the creepy old man in Love and Death with the giant beard. Diane Keaton steps on his beard because he's talking about like, the best thing in life is 12-year-old girls, too, if at all possible. But she, and this is a script Alan wrote and had control over, and she says, oh, your grubbiness, you're like, there's clear signs of not approving of it. At the same time, that could, just be the person in conversation with their desires in plain sight. But Manhattan is definitely the creepy one for sure.
What's the one that came out right as the whole thing with Soon-Yi was going on?
Oh, that was Husbands and Wives.
That's actually Husbands and Wives. Oh.
I think. Yeah, no, it's definitely Husbands and Wives, because that's the last one that Mia Farrow appears in because she was contractually obligated to finish the film.
Okay.
And that is a weird, tense little movie.
Is that the one with the professor and the student?
Well, there's a professor-student thing in Manhattan.
No, but I'm thinking of something later.
I think there's a professor-student. Yeah, like now that because I saw it when I was so I watched 30 Woody Allen movies in 1 month when I was 13, because they had a section at the video store, and part of autism is beating a subject to death and then beating it a couple extra times to make sure it's dead, right?
Like the person who goes through 35 years of Doctor Strange issues and finds every single spell.
That guy was definitely on the spectrum. Or, well, no, okay, I don't want to say for sure.
Yeah. We're not providing diagnosis. Anything that we say, anything of a psychological nature that we say about anybody else is for entertainment purposes only. And
dear sir, when I say you're on the spectrum, it's just game recognizing game.
Yeah. If I say, oh, you must be bipolar, then it's just.
It's just me trying to take back the word.
Yeah, there we go.
But yeah, so I watched all of and I mean, a lot of them are a blur except the ones that I watched. Love and Death was always my favorite one. Like, I could still quote like half that fucking movie, but it has to like go in the attic in the back of my head now, because creepy things. But yeah, Husbands and Wives, God, that might be an interesting one to watch just because it's such an uncomfortable, like any breakup movie like that. Like the only other movie I can think of where it's like that apparent that the people on screen are having like some kind of intense personal falling out, and you get the sense of the intense falling out through the thing, is the last Martin and Lewis movie, Hollywood or Bust, which is just like an incredibly awkward, uncomfortable movie to watch, particularly because they're still pitching it as this broad comedy for younger people. God, I can't remember. Yeah, I think there's something to do with a student. There's adultery, because like every Woody Allen movie, that's the two themes that he is eternally obsessed with are like middle-class people cheating on each other and stage magic.
Juliette Lewis, is that who?
Yeah, Juliette Lewis. Yeah, from Howard the Duck. She's probably famous from something that wasn't Howard the Duck, but I remember seeing Howard the
Benny and June.
Right. She's in Benny and June.
No, Howard the Duck, was she in it?
Because there's the infamous scene where I forget forget if it's Howard the Duck, because I mean they didn't have practical special effects down to where you could have Howard the Duck look halfway decent. So it just looks like a midget in like a bad Donald Duck Halloween costume for most of the movie. And there's this scene with him and Juliette Lewis, who he met when she's dancing like in a cage at a nightclub, and they're laying in bed together, and one or the other of them is saying like, I'm so lonely, and the other one says, well, maybe it's not a human you need, implying that Juliette Lewis is going to have sex with this duck from another dimension.
Do you mean Leah Thompson?
Oh shit! Yeah, I do think I do.
Okay.
Leah Thompson.
I was like, because we're getting further.
They look
further
really
into it,
similar, though, right? No, or am I just imagining that?
They might. There was something about Juliette Lewis that I really did not like early on. I actually like her better now.
Was she in Singles? Was that one she was in?
Juliette Lewis. Lewis.
I can't think of another movie she was in besides Husbands and Wives now.
Oh yeah, and Benny and June.
Oh right, Benny and June.
Natural Born Killers.
Oh right, because she's like the Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah. Cape Fear.
Never saw it.
Oh.
The Scorsese one, I'm guessing. In '93.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't think she was born when the original Cape Fear was made.
Wait, there was one before that?
Yeah, it's a remake. But I think the original's from 1963.
It's so funny now. There's all these now. I'm an old man. It's so funny. So there's movies, when I was growing up, and I was like not realizing that something was a remake. So I know at the time I definitely didn't realize it, unless I was reading something about it, and then eventually found out. But now there's all these movies that I watched when I was younger that are being remade, and people are seeing it for the first. That's the one they're seeing. That's what they're seeing first. What was I saying? What was it about Juliette Lewis? No. Movies.
Oh, remakes. Yeah, you're seeing remakes occur of movies that you saw when they were originally out.
Right. And that people don't realize are actually remakes. Or then you go, this isn't a remake. This is prequel / sequel. Oh. No, well, there's that. No, people that have grown up on Star Wars Episode 1 being the first movie. So you actually
start that's why they called it Episode 1, right?
Right, because that's where it starts.
Yeah.
Watch them in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, soon to be 9. I don't know who. And Rogue One. Rogue One fits in between 3 and 4. So yeah,
Star Wars is like a 40-year exercise in seeing how high Americans can actually count.
Well, and you need fractions. So I don't know, The Mandalorian, what number is that? Because that takes place, that takes place in the future. It takes place after 6, I believe. And I can't believe that I know this much because I don't have Disney Plus. I've not watched The Mandalorian, but I know too much about it already. And of course, Baby Yoda. But everybody knows about Baby Yoda. Sorry. So, yet another tangent. The whole point was, people that see it, and it's like, that's the way it's supposed to be. Not realizing, not that for, it's not a very good example because probably most people who are watching all of them realized that 4, 5, and 6 came out beforehand. But and this is different from a remake. But the whole idea is that you grew up with those movies being available as opposed to growing up saying, but when's Episode 1 coming out? I've seen 4, 5, and 6. I want to see what happens beforehand, and I want to see what happens after. Total side. When 7 came out, what's that one?
Force Awakens.
Force Awakens. Thank you. And
Why
I
do
told
I know that?
a coworker. Everybody does. A coworker who hadn't seen it yet. He was a big
Star Wars. Put it in the water.
I don't get it. Oh, sorry.
It's just like in me somehow, and I don't know how it got there.
I was imagining, how does The Force Awakens describe something that's you put in the water? And imagining like one of those little tiny, I don't know, the like dinosaurs and stuff, the little foam thing.
Oh yeah.
The little foam capsule that you then put in water.
10 times its size in water.
Yeah. So the Force, the foam awakens. So my friend who was a huge Star Wars fan, he hadn't seen it yet. And I'd already seen it twice at that point, and I was nowhere near the fan he was. But he told me he wanted to know how it was, but he didn't want a single spoiler. And so my description of it was 16 years ago, or no, whatever it was, 16 years ago or 10 years ago when we finally, after waiting for 16 years, got Episode 1. This was the movie we deserved. Force Awakens was the movie that we were promised back when Episode 1 came out.
Because I remember when episode 1 came out, like, my family, we waited, I think it was almost out of theaters by the time I saw it. It was at least like a month and a half after it had initially released. And I remember just feeling kind of like, I am supposed to like this. This is part of what society expects out of me as a fourth grader. Like it felt kind of like paying my taxes or something. Except, you know, you're in fourth grade, you don't know what paying your taxes is, but like it's that same kind of like, this isn't a moral obligation, so I guess it's a civic obligation.
To go watch Star Wars?
Yeah, to go watch episode 1 and have some kind of opinion about episode 1.
But had you seen the others at that point?
Yeah, because we had the VHS set that came out when Lucas re-edited it, and I watched it with my my dad on the TV.
Okay.
And, yeah, I loved that stuff for a little bit, and then I went back to reading obnoxious quantities of Spider-Man comics until I was like 10 or 11. And by obnoxious, I mean literally like hundreds upon like anything I could get my hands on. And it's weird because now I go back to like Spider-Man comics and it's like unreadable, especially the ones I was reading at the time, like 90s Spider-Man comics. One of the lowest points of the comics medium as a whole, maybe, outside of like outright, like just, they're not really offensive in any way. I mean, they're not really progressive in any way, but outside of like outright racist, like hate literature done in comics form, the writing's just so bad. Everything has constant narration from Spider-Man in little captions.
Oh, yeah.
He's a dude with anxiety problems. He has what the DSM-6 should have called narrator syndrome. He just wants to say, like, and it goes into pure soap opera mode, right? And I don't envy the writer's position, right? Because they get handed this guy who's basically like, I think the initial concept of Spider-Man was, what happens if we make Archie, but he's a superhero, right? Because you got like the romance comic soap opera side of things because he's a teenager, and then you got the superhero side of things because he's a superhero. But yeah, so he's in his 30s by the 90s. The comics industry as a whole was at a nadir. Like there was a lot of great stuff being published by the big indies, you know, Fantagraphics, Drawn and Quarterly. Top Shelf did not exist at that point, so basically Drawn and Quarterly, Fantagraphics, and that's it. But Dark Horse put out a good amount of like good stuff in the early 90s. Everybody else was just kind of like, oh, we need to make comic books like more dark, more gritty, because clearly that's what the public wants. And so you have like Mary Jane gets a smoking problem, and then she gets pregnant, and then she has a miscarriage. Spider-Man has 5 different clones, but we don't know which one's the real one until we figure out which one has the best ratings. And we're considering replacing him with like the one that's basically like Swamp Thing, but he's more moody, but he also vaguely looks like Spider-Man but with a cape. Or it's kind of like what they did after the Death of Superman thing, right? They have 5 different Supermen. There's the one made out of steel, there's Superboy, there's like basically Superman but in a new black costume a la Spider-Man in the 80s. And they just sort of tracked comic sales, and eventually they realized like, oh, we can actually just capitalize on all 5 of these guys now. We can get like quintuple equity on Superman now, which fortunately did not happen with Spider-Man. Eventually people realized that the Clone Saga thing had gone on for far too long, but only after it literally went on for like why do you need to publish 4 separate Spider-Man comic books a month? B, why do they all have to be interconnected? So it's basically just one weekly comic where the art style and the writing changes at like a schizophrenic pace. every week. C, why do I care at a certain point? Like, it went on for literally maybe 200 comic books. You know, and I thought it was cool at the time because they put shiny covers on it. It's like, ooh, you know, it's a superhero, looks cool. I like Spider-Man. Finally, I think I was at like a flea market or something with my mother, and some guy who was an incredibly nice guy, and I recognize that now, sold me an almost complete run of the Ditko Stan Lee Spider-Man comics in reprint form in Marvel Tales, which is where they used to reprint all of them. 10 cents a comic, because he saw that I was like, you know, I looked like a little shrimp. And he felt bad.
Wow, 10 cents each.
I went home and I just devoured those, and I was like, oh, shit, okay. I've been like, I don't know why I was so obsessed with comic books, because I grew up at literally the worst time you could possibly grow up with superhero comic books. But.
Well, to answer two out of the three, to cynically answer 2 out of 3 of the questions, is why were there so many, and why were there so many Spider-Mans? The plural of Spider-Man is Spider-Mans, not Spider-Men, because of the name. But the why were there so many, and why were they all interconnected? So for those two, so I want you to imagine the letter S. And then I want you to imagine 2 vertical lines parallel to each other from slightly above the top of that S and then crossing through to slightly the bottom. So can you picture that in your head? Yeah. So I could see money as the motive there.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I definitely got that.
Why are you doing it? That's a whole nother thing, but it's a why.
Right. Well, those comics would become like worthless pretty quickly because they were printed in such quantities. So I guess that was like the coolest looking superhero thing that I would see in the quarter bin, because that was sort of the unspoken arrangement between me and my parents was I can read however many comics so long as I'm getting them out of the cheapest bin at the comic book store, which at that point was 25 cents or 6 for a buck.
Okay. So 10 cents was an even bigger bargain than what
Oh, yeah, 10 cents for that stuff. Yeah, and they you know, nice shape and everything. I don't know what happened to those, but it might still be in a box somewhere in my parents' house. But anyway, yeah, the 90s just were not a good time for mainstream comics at all.
Speaking of superheroes, Franz Lisztomania.
Yeah, Lisztomania.
So, any other thoughts about it? Other than, well, you probably never see another movie kind of like that.
Yeah, you're not really. I mean, I can think of a couple movies offhand where they have the same kind of irreverent tone towards history, chronology, and world politics. But you're not going to see another movie probably ever again where Roger Daltrey is being pulled along by his 12-foot penis and Ringo Starr is the Pope.
Yeah. There will likely never be another movie like that. And they're both alive, so they could.
Yeah, we could.
Maybe a list.
Well, we could bring them back CGI, and we could like add a foot to Roger Daltrey's penis to show how far the technology's come.
That's now. It's come along so far that it could be 13 feet instead of just 12.
So
I don't know. What do you think? Was it worth did it match the hype?
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. I was not expecting. I guess I was expecting something more like Phantom of the Paradise.
Okay,
where it's like cheesy, kind of over the top. This was a thing that superficially looked cheesy and over the top, but deep down had a lot of like very deep concerns about fairly unsettling questions, ideas, and events.
Okay. I like that. Yeah. I mean, it's got the whole thing with Nazis' rise to power. So can't get around that. Yeah, so that was Lisztomania.
And this has been Dan.
And we forgot to watch an episode of Super Friends.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So,
but
yeah, that was Dan.
There were some Super Friends.
There were superheroes. Sort of. Yeah, Superman was in it. Wonder Woman was in it. Thor was in it. So that was a crossover.
We got in that like comic book discussion part of the show that we know. Well, actually, one of the listener who's a friend of mine in New York, he was asking about like, oh, I really want to hear, because I want to hear you bitch and moan about superheroes some more, because it was so pleasurable when you did it to all of us on social media.
Okay.
So this one goes goes out to you, buddy.
Right at you too, out there, buddy I've never met. So anyways, so you started saying goodbye, and now I say, and this is Ron.
And this has been a nominee.
A nominee, mostly spoilers, mostly movie spoilers. We'll figure it out.
It's it's questionable. You know, it smells a little sour.
A nominee, questionable movies.
Yeah, that's the winner.
That's the winner.
Nominee, questionable movies.
All right, because the movies is important, so people know what it's about.
Yeah, because we're not like specifically going after good movies. We're not specifically going after bad movies, but we're going after movies with a lot of question marks.
Yeah.
Kind of steaming off of them.
Listomania, question mark, question mark. Mac and Me, question mark, question mark, question mark. Citizen Kane, question mark, question mark, question mark. Okay, on that note, take care, y'all.
Later.